on circular economy for a greener Latin American and the Caribbean. My name is. Start again? Okay. No, wait. Okay. Hi, please. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be hosting, for CAF, to be hosting today's side event on circular economy for a greener Latin American and the Caribbean. My name is Carolina Cortez. I'm climate change specialist at CAF. And as you know, the post-COVID economic recovery has been far from green as emissions continue to rise, and in some sectors even surpass 2019 levels. Meanwhile, the latest emissions cut pledges are still falling short from the 1.5 degrees Celsius target set in the Paris Agreement. In fact, current pledges are likely to reach the 2.4 degrees Celsius temperature increase to worsen this scenario. Existing policies even would increase the temperature to 2.6 degrees Celsius average. Thus, to reach the Paris Agreement, there is a clear need for more ambitious goals and pledges addition to the significant change in the global economy. To achieve the latter, according to several reports, the key may rely on the circular economy. Circular economy can be understood as a model of production and consumption in which the cycle of products is extended. In practice, it implies reducing waste to a minimum when the product reaches to the end of its life. Its materials are kept within the economy wherever as possible. In other words, the output becomes an input in the new economy, which is based on a take, make, consume through any pattern. The circular economy involves sharing and leasing, reassuring, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products as long as possible. The reason behind implementing a circular economy worldwide are several. First of all, global pollution is growing fast, and within the demand of raw materials. The supply of these materials is limited, and its extraction and use are demanding the environment while increasing the greenhouse gas emissions. In that sense, it is stated that although the energy transition is the key to a low-carbon future and could reduce 28 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions through renewable and efficient energy and electric mobility, it is not enough. That is to say, 45% of the 51 billion tons of annual greenhouse gas emissions emitted by 2050 come from the industry, agriculture, forestry, and land use. Technological innovation, diet shift, and the carbon capture use and storage can reduce the emissions up to 13 billion tons. But the remaining 10 million tons can be cut down by implementing a circular economy worldwide, which could ensure a carbon net zero future. Last but not least, the possible of global warming reaching the 3 Celsius degrees by 2100, and considering existing policies, the toll of human lives will be significant. In fact, the asymmetrical consequences of climate change will impact when further and most vulnerable, especially in regions in the global south, such as Latin America and the Caribbean. This would lead to productivity and employment losses, food and water scarcity, as well as diminished living conditions worldwide. Countries need to focus on a long-term economic strategy to improve their living conditions while diminishing the greenhouse gas emissions. Latin American and the Caribbean countries, due to their vulnerability to climate change and limited resources to face the negative consequences, need to work on a circular economy strategies to be implemented in the short term. This side event aims to highlight not only the circular economy as a necessary step to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, but also the main challenges and opportunities given to this new economic model, and to highlight the need of implementing a circular economy as an essential step towards achieving climate targets set by the Paris Agreement. We have here with us, please, José Luis Samaniego, which is the Director of Sustainable Development and Human Settlements Division of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And we are going to have afterwards a panel with Marta Castillo, who is the Climate Change Coordinator of CAF. Then we also will have Frank Riesberg, who leads the Global Green Growth Institute in supporting government's transition towards a model of economic growth that is environmental sustainable and social inclusive. And we will have Alana Cragen, which is the Climate Policy Coordinator at the Climate Policy Strategy Team at the UNDP. So please, I will be honored to have José Luis doing our first presentation as a keynote speaker.
Thank you, Carolina. Please, can you put the presentation on? We have been working on the circular economy file for a while now, and one of the approaches that we're trying to develop is to see the impacts of the changing structure by means of the input-output matrix, which will tell us what the real impact of an intended change in the structure can be. Next, please. First of all, let me give you a picture. This is the way all waste is behaving in Latin America, with one exception. The electronics, which goes on an exponential route. So here what we see is the increasing GDP per capita, and in this case is the level of recycling. We have up to, let's say, close to 20% in the case of Colombia, but the average for the whole region is around 4%, whereas the OECD countries have an average of recycling their waste of 20%. But since we have the same behavior in all the curves of generation, what we are expecting is a real tsunami of waste for which we are not structurally prepared yet. Next one, please. This is our mantra, and this is why we choose certain sectors. And this reflects the structure of the economic structure of Latin America and the Caribbean. And the problem is, as you can see, that we are not able to achieve the three pillars of the 2030 agenda simultaneously. The structure will not allow us to do that. Why? Because if we were to achieve the social targets, let's say eliminate poverty and decrease inequality, the economy would have to be growing at least at 4% between now and 2030, plus a redistribution effort of about 0.5 points of GDP annually until 2030. That is clearly out of reach. In average, historically, in good times, the region grows at 2%, which is more or less the amount that the economy can self-finance through its exports structure. But that clearly goes well beyond of the carrying capacity of the region if measured by the level of ambition of the NDCs that would require that with the present structure, we would have to decrease the economy instead of growing. So the only way of reconciling this contradiction is by changing the structure to things that either require less imports or allow us to export more, to be more dynamic, and be closer to closing the social gap, or have a structure that is more intensive in employment and inclusion and creates better public goods that doesn't need to grow so much, or move to an economic structure that opens the environmental threshold, which is cleaner, non-fossil fuels, whatever. So there are just a few sectors and a few packages of economic policy that allow us to cross through this door. We so far have identified about 7 or 8 sectors. Among them is renewable energy, which is lower in carbon footprint, it can be less demanding of imports if it's produced regionally. And certainly it creates more jobs, more inclusion, electrification in hard to electrify areas and so on. The same is true for public transportation. Lower carbon footprint, it can be produced with the industrial structure that we have in Latin America, and it creates public goods, public services, and so on. So these sectors that behave in the same way are what we call the tractor sectors, or the key sectors for the 2030 agenda. One of them is the circular economy. It lowers the carbon footprint, it increases its linkages with the rest of the economy, and it is more inclusive in terms of jobs. The next one, please. So we try to simulate, by means of manipulating the input-output matrix, what could be the effect of increasing the uptake of circular economy. We did it country by country for 4 countries, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, by changing the amount of re-injection or decrease of material use by category of materials: plastics, metals, building materials, and oil derivatives. So for each of the countries, for example, we say Chile will decrease its use of fossil fuels by 30% between now and 2030, 10% its building materials, and so on. But to compare the countries, we chose the most conservative scenario, which is the lesser amount chosen by any of the 4 countries. And what we did, we compared the effects on GDP growth and employment, the changes in production, and the effects on the greenhouse gas emissions. The next slide, please, over there. Down there. Thank you. These are the results we found, which are pretty interesting. GDP grows for the 4 countries with this very conservative scenario. Employment grows, and there's a very strong reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly for Chile, with one exception, which is Peru. Peru had a slight increase in their fossil fuel emissions, in their greenhouse gas emissions, but that's probably because of the scenario we chose. We don't know. We would have to be testing further the case of Peru. But in general, we can see that it aligns well with the targets of the 2030 agenda. It behaves as anticipated as one of those key tractor sectors. Next one, please. Next slide. Yes. Here is how they behave vis-a-vis other sectors, the average sectors in the economy, in terms of what they demand from the economy and what they demand of imports in the input-output matrix. And what we see here is that in some countries, it behaves better in both counts. In the case of Japan, it demands more from the domestic economy than from the imports. Yes? That lessens the external restriction, which is this point of the triangle that I was pointing at the beginning. In the case of Mexico, it behaves close to the average of the rest of the economy, probably a little bit better, and probably marginally better also in terms of imports, demands of imports. So also it lessens the external restriction. So in this case, it combines the 3 things we want: inclusiveness, lesser external restriction, lesser environmental footprint. The next one. And here is how it behaves vis-a-vis the multiplier of output of GDP and the multiplier of demand on GDP vis-a-vis also the average behavior of the rest of the sectors. So we use this little label here to qualify the behavior of the sectors. So let's see the 2 extremes. In the case of Germany, it has a stronger multiplier than the rest of the sectors in the economy. It behaves better. The circular economy sector behaves better. And it also behaves better in terms of what it creates when selling the products of the circular economy. So that gives us a key sector. It's very well ingrained in the economy. Whereas, for example, in the other extreme, in the case of Colombia, it behaves under the average of the rest of the sectors in both counts, in terms of the output multiplier and the demand multiplier. So we can call it an island, an independent sector. Its traction is not as much as in Germany. It could be improved as we change the economic structure. But anyway, they have a positive effect on the rest of the input-output matrix. Not as key as in Germany, but we could not just discard it out. Next one, please. Here I use 3 examples. One is mobility. Most countries in the region have policies like this. We will be cleaner by 2050. We will all be electric in terms of mobility by 2035 in a certain percentage, 100% by 2050. This means a lot of mechanical waste, electronic waste from the fleets that are leaving the system right now, and in the future of the electronic waste of the electric vehicles that we are introducing into the economy. So it's a signal that if this is the policy to be enforced, we should be preparing to create the structure to recycle all of that, and hopefully to design it in a way that allows it to be interoperable, recyclable, reusable, and the rest. This is another example. That is for selling new vehicles or for targets of cleanliness of the vehicles. This is what's already happening in the region. The conversion of present-day internal combustion engines to electric vehicles, which speeds up the absorption of electric mobility in the region. 1/3 cheaper, 2/3 cheaper, actually, is 1/3 of the cost of an electric bus or an electric vehicle. It can be done in all the workshops that we have throughout Latin America, even in the Caribbean cities and Central America. So this is at hand for the region to recycle the vehicle stock throughout the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean. Next one, please. This is the outlook of what will happen with batteries. We have 500 gigawatts of capacity of lead batteries now, which is less than what we use, is more than what we use right now with lithium. But lithium is expected to grow to 2,500 gigawatts of capacity, which is 5 times the capacity of all the lead batteries we have nowadays. So we should be preparing for this future, which combines with the other slide of converting vehicles. Very dramatically here, only Brazil does good recycling of vehicle tires. Mexico, Argentina, 2 of the largest countries in Latin America, hardly recycle anything. Argentina is not even close to 10%. So there's a lot to be done there. And 2 more examples and I finish. Please, next one. Here is the record of what countries are doing, basically since 2016, which are close to the earliest initiatives in terms of banning single-use plastics, putting requirements on manufacture, imports, and so on. And it's a trend that's going to grow. So this will demand an infrastructure for plastic recycling, which we do not have basically in place in the economy. Next one, please. And this is the last. This is just to illustrate that we could be tracing materials throughout the economy. It's already technically possible to have a digital passport for plastics, for metals, for all kinds of materials, except liquids. We could be tracing these materials throughout the economy and do the materials balance and know what's in the consumer hand, in the producer hand, and in the environment. Anything that is missing is because it's in the environment. Next one. This is to illustrate the opportunity we're losing by not producing the necessary components of the value chain. Lithium is in Latin America and also a little bit in Australia. It will be discovered in other countries too, but the main factories are in the US, China, Korea, and Japan. So it's happening with us as it happened with oil, with copper. It's happening already also with lithium. And the next one, please. These are the main menu. This is the main menu of policies that are being used throughout the world. You can see that there's either planning, there are taxes for final disposition, there's the banning of disposition of certain residues in managed dumps. What's the elegant word for dumps? Rellenos? Landfills, thank you. And here we have segregation, and here we have incentives. And it's very striking to see the number of policy alternatives used, and also very striking the case of Germany, that with only three main instruments, one is incentives, regulation, and the banning of certain final disposition in landfills, that they have achieved 62% of proper management of the residues. And here we have a few things which I think are worth to underline. One is the regional partnerships and arrangements, such as common standards. What for? To increase the scale of action, to increase the size of the markets, the interoperability of the infrastructures, and of course, standards to be able to reuse, standards for design, capability, innovation, aligning the fiscal policy, aligning the financial policy too, and then last one, next one. Here are the closing messages I want to leave with you. One is, it is a sector that is suitable to closing the three gaps. It's good for the environment, it's good for society, it's good for the economy. The numbers tell us that. Second, there are policies on their way, but they are very insufficient for the kind of challenge that is out there and that is coming towards us fast. There are more incentives needed to increase the size of circular economy, and one big challenge, which is not an expensive challenge for these times that run where we have a fiscal restriction and so on, and we depleted our finances with COVID, we need to enable the sector to emerge. We need to do the proper regulatory frameworks. And let me finalize with one example. I said that it is viable to turn the existing fossil fuel fleet into electrics, to convert them. The main reason why that is not happening is not because of technology, it's because of regulation. It's uncertain. It's not forbidden. Only in Chile it's forbidden. In the rest of the countries, it's in limbo. It's not dealt with. It's not regulated. So insurance companies, financial companies, investors do not want to go into a limbo sector. So we need a clear signal, by the way, a cheap signal to produce, to allow for this sector to really emerge with force. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis, for your inputs. Now, please, I would like to continue with the panel. So, Ana, Frank, and Marta, could you please step up? Okay, Jose Luis. Jose Luis also, please, if you're invited. So with your closing remarks that you said, Jose Luis, we have employment, we have roadmaps of national circular economy strategies, fiscal policies, incentives, regulatory framework nationally. So I would like to start with thank you for being part of this side event of circular economy. And with this, I would like to start asking you, from your perspective, what are the main opportunities for the different actors involved in a circular economy in each of your organizations? So I would start with UNDP. Anna Craigan, please.
Thank you very much. So at UNDP, we are seeing that there's huge potential for countries to integrate circular economy in their nationally determined contributions. So this is not just the case for raising mitigation ambition, but it's also to build resilience against the impacts of climate change, but also against regional and global shocks, such as what we're experiencing now with rising fuel costs and food costs. And under UNDP's Climate Promise initiative, we are supporting over 70 countries that are integrating circular economy into their NDCs. And this is, they're looking at key sectors such as agriculture, energy, tourism, and the countries are already leveraging these entry points to integrate circular economy. Opportunities exist, for example, to strengthen engagement with key stakeholders, particularly in this region, indigenous peoples. We're seeing that, indigenous peoples have been implementing circular economy solutions for centuries, and we really should look to document this indigenous knowledge and help replicate and scale up these solutions where culturally and contextually appropriate. Another opportunity as well is what we're seeing actually is that countries they have a limited knowledge of circular economy and its potential for tackling the climate, nature, and pollution crises. So we're really needing to raise awareness about the potential of circular economy and how it can help reduce emissions. And one way to do this is through the regional platforms. So, for example, UNDP, UNEP, UNFCCC, and the World Bank, we organize regional climate weeks, which helps provide a platform for all stakeholders to come together and share experiences and challenges and lessons learned on circular economy and how they can leverage these measures for their climate plans. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And indeed, the link between waste and climate is important, not least because a lot of the organic fraction of waste can emit a lot of methane. So as part of the methane pledge, there's a lot of interest in waste as well. But of course, in many countries, there are waste-related issues, as you explained quite nicely, that go beyond climate. Plastic has many other side effects. Too many countries are still seeing waste crisis because the landfill is full, and what do you do next, right? So yeah, definitely, as you asked, different sides, different actors have a key role. Private sector, they're often in charge of collection, often a public-private partnership, finding ways to have the private sector more involved in increasing the collection rate is still, in many cases, a challenge. But we also need the private sector for large-scale investments in waste to energy or waste to resource projects. That can only happen if the government sets the right conditions, the right policies, and often enforces the policies they already have. There's quite a few countries where there are policies on the books that aren't really enforced and where there's still too much wild dumping of waste in many areas. Finally, let me ask for a bit more attention for the informal sector. There's too many circular economy projects that ignore the informal sector or try to replace the waste pickers, where I think the informal sector is often what is currently in place for the circular economy. Lots of small companies that do some form of recycling, lots of waste pickers that are at the bottom of the pyramid. So I would love to see more circular economy approaches that explicitly include the informal sector, from waste pickers to small recycling companies. I'll leave it at that for now.
I think in terms of what we have been working in CAF in the last years, and thinking what is the role of Regional Development Bank of CAF, like CAF, for circular economy, we have been trying to support the legislations for the process, but as you said, not only legislation to be in the law, but also all the implementation. I think there is a lot to do in terms of the legislation, and we have been working in Chile and Ecuador some special, routes and the next steps in these countries to support the circular economy. In the case of Argentina, we have been working in the implementation of the definition of the national strategy, but again, how much is the money and how is the investment that you have to make for implementation. And in the Mexico also, the general law for circular economy, that was another thing that we did from CAF we have been trying to support. But again, that's a really important point to start, to define the regulations, how to deal with this. But of course, are the financial mechanisms that you were mentioning in the presentation? There is no mechanism defining, and also another thing that you also mentioned right now is the informality. So even if you have the financial mechanisms, those are mechanisms that are not useful for the informal ones. So there are still some really important gaps in terms to put together and finally to have an opportunity for the circular economy working and in field moving forward in our countries. I think for now, Caro.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I have been hearing is, one, we have policies. It was very interesting when you, Jose Luis, you named that in Germany they have like 3 policies that are really enough to tackle a circular economy. So maybe it's not to make much more policies, but to put in place policies and to make them comply with them. The other is we're talking with our clients, which are our clients, for example, in the regional banks, which are our clients, so we can work with them to develop a project in circular economy. But then we're talking about also the last beneficiaries that are working with us that are for the agricultural sector, for example, because we work with, from CAF, we work with governments mainly and with national development banks, but then how can we make the financial mechanisms to go down to the last beneficiary? So we have to see the complete map. That's what I'm getting from you. So after that, I would like to know in a more concrete way, which are the projects that are being developed UNDP, GGI, or at CAF. I don't know if from LAC also you have projects with the countries on circular economy directly with the governments. So please also if you can enlighten us with that.
I will mention one example, which is small, with a small repercussion, but it has all the barriers. It's a jigsaw puzzle. The municipality of Santiago has one big advantage. It doesn't pay to get its garbage collected. It does it with its own fleet. So the garbage, without moving any contracts, belongs to the municipality. So it could be taken, instead of to a landfill, it can be taken to a factory to be processed. So we have 2 possible technologies to apply there. One is to recycle mechanically the plastics, which is smaller than the other alternative, or recycle chemically, both the plastics and a portion of the organics. And that could take care of the need for that community to take to a landfill its garbage. But then you have to put together the jigsaw puzzle. What do you do with the pickers? Would it be better to have a social enterprise? What do we do with the risk qualification? Is there any example previous for the banking system to learn that this can be done? The products that the process can put into the market are mainstream. It's black carbon, it's water, it's diesel, and it's gas, natural gas, basically. So that shouldn't be a problem. But presently, regulation in Chile is for fossil fuels. It says nothing about hydrocarbons that do not come from the fossil world. So you need to put really together everything. You need the maintenance for the machines, you need the capital sector to produce those machines, and so on. So it's, as you were saying, you need to see the full picture and to make everything fit, hopefully at the same time.
Thank you. Just going back to my previous point around supporting countries to leverage circular economy measures in their NDCs, UNDP together with UNEP and the UNFCCC were actually developing an interactive online toolbox that aims to support countries both in the global north and the global south to identify, to implement and to track circular economy interventions in their NDCs. So this is really based around the four-stage policy cycle. So policymakers can jump in at any stage of the cycle, depending on their national context. And it's based on, tried and tested tools. So we have tools around assessing unsustainable hotspots of production and consumption, around tracking, monitoring and reporting under the enhanced transparency framework under UNFCCC's processes. So this is something that we're developing and we'll be launching early next year. And we will be piloting the toolbox in a number of countries, including in LAC. And this is to kind of complement all the great work that we're already seeing at UNDP. So, for example, just to give a few country examples, in Ecuador, we have been supporting the national government to develop we have developed a white paper on circular economy. So that kind of assesses and prioritizes the sectors for circular interventions, and also the roadmap for its national strategy on sustainable consumption and production. Another example that I love is in Mexico. So we collaborated with, I think it was Pacific Ports Institute and a local fishing association. And it was a pilot project to recover plastic waste from rivers, beaches, and the ocean. And they actually used this waste to manufacture high-value products. So this was decorative products, architectural products, as well as public infrastructure. They were making bus stops out of this waste. And the low-value plastics that they couldn't use, they were then transforming this into plastic sand that they would then use in masonry for public sidewalks and all these things. So this is a really great example because this actually came about from a part of their coastline that was overfished, so the local fishing communities couldn't find any more fish. And it was also as a result of the pandemic, where they had lost lots of jobs, they weren't able to work. So it was a really great way for us to create these green jobs and help these local communities sustain their livelihoods. And then perhaps just one final example, in Mexico we had supported national governments and subnational governments to build capacities around electronic waste. So how to better capture the waste, how to better recycle, dismantle, and treatment processes. So there's lots going on, and I definitely think LAC, we often look to LAC for these examples because there's lots of rich experiences that other countries can look to help replicate and scale up. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, GGI is an intergovernmental organization, rather smaller than UNDP, less well known. We have about 45 member countries now. Our staff sit in 37 countries, and we do two key things. Policies, so that's quite similar to you. And in Latin America, we worked with the municipality of Lima, for instance, to develop the circular economy strategy for Lima and for the 43 sub-districts. And we've done that in quite a few other countries as well. Putting in place the right kind of policies, which for circular economy often means with starting separation at source, because that's what messes up the whole cycle very often. And then the second thing we do, which is maybe a bit different than UNEP, more working like with CAF, is to put in place investment projects, particularly large-scale waste-to-energy or waste-to-resource investment projects. And that means we help our government structure bankable projects, and then we find investors. That could be CAF. We do partner with CAF, as you know. Happy to partner with CAF in other areas, green bonds right now. But we have, for instance, recently helped introduce a new mechanical biological treatment. In Cambodia, the government had a crisis, the landfill is full, you see it everywhere. And the first thought is, oh, we need another landfill. And we say, no, you don't need another landfill. Actually, in the end, we found a project that takes the plastic out of the landfill and turns it into refuse-derived fuel, use that in a cement plant to replace coal, and the cement factory was willing to pay for it. So it was only a matter of introducing the idea to the government, making the policy feasible, structuring the project, finding the investor, and there are many examples like that. Sometimes it's commercially attractive, sometimes we need a little bit of ODA, or sometimes we need a credit guarantee to encourage a local bank to invest in something which is a risky project. So policy and investment projects, those are the two key areas where I think we can do a lot of good in circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. In our case, I think I completely agree with what you said in terms of what we are doing right now. The experience is in terms of the support, the development of regulatory frameworks in the countries, just for the useful and to implement the circular economy. In terms of the investment projects, right now we are in the pilot phase, and we are working with some technical cooperation to have some examples in some of the countries, but there is no, I mean, those are small, really small projects, pilot projects that we are trying to learn with them. But as I said before, there are many parts of the puzzle that we need put in place. I don't know if at the same time that will be possible. That's the best case of scenario, but that we are working right now. Some pilot projects for technical cooperation, a small technical cooperation with some small projects in Colombia, I know, also in Peru, and another ones that I think in Ecuador is small project. That's what we are doing right now at this moment. And of course, the opportunity is huge, and more than the opportunity, I mean the responsibility for the whole society to put in place the circular economy, it's huge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then some ideas are getting to me right now. For example, in Ecuador, in landfills, what you mentioned, in one of the cities in Puerto Viejo that we are working in some, in Guayaquil and in Cuenca, in producing energy from the landfill. But then in Puerto Viejo, they asked us, well, we are closing this area, now we have to open the second one, and that's something that it's really going on in different countries, not only in Ecuador. And I think that's interesting to seeing which are the policies that we have to implement, and we have to help the government to envision and to see another possibility, not the business as usual that we are used to. So that's also interesting. And then for the last question, I think the most important challenge that we are finding right now is how to get up to have the puzzle fixed, but that's going to take some time. And then we have the policies from one place, then we have the consumers in other place, we have the banking that we want to finance projects. Where do you think are the challenges from your perspective that we can start working with the government or with the bank, or, well, where can we start to this work?
I would start it with the retrofit of cars, because it only takes to have the legal framework in place for the whole economic forces to start moving around that. And if we take into account that we have at least 20% rate of car ownership in Latin America, that's over 120 million vehicles, which is very significant. So starting to retrofit that, putting the insurance system at the service of insuring the retrofitted cars, making them as affordable as internal combustion engines are right now in the banking system, that would be a great place to start.
I think, in designing and implementing circular economy strategies requires a really wide range of capacities, technical expertise, support. And so I think it goes back to building these capacities for countries to understand, for all stakeholders to understand the potential of circular economy. And we know that, circular economy measures by nature are very cross-cutting and economy-wide, especially if we're looking across value chains and perhaps more upstream, looking at, measures that help design out waste and pollution from the get-go. And so this will require coordination not only within ministries but also across ministries. So not just within Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, but also looking at Ministry of Planning, of Economy, of Finance. So I think this is one challenge that we're seeing. And another is also access to finance. So, especially when it comes to SMEs that are looking to transition to circular business models, and how they can have access to this finance and support that transition. We do see, there's a strong banking system within the region. So I am hopeful that this banking system wants to be a part of this circular and green transition. So I am hopeful that those needs will be met. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I like the retrofitting of cars. I think we're getting more and more bullish about that as well. But I was going to come up with another one that I think is, with all due respect for the pilots, we kind of need to get away from the pilots. There are too many pilots and we need to go to scale. I think in waste, there are actually good technical solutions that are not widely applied enough. There's too much business as usual thinking about landfills, which frankly are expensive. They're not a real good solution. There are good technical solutions that can be picked up and that can go to scale. So rather than pilots, I would love to see more whole system solutions where the solution is as big as the problem. So we think of whole cities that come up with large enough waste to resource and waste to energy projects that they become financially viable. And then we need a little bit of help from development finance institutions. I think actually AFD is still the chair of the IDFC, isn't it? With AFD, we're working on the global circular economy and waste facility to take it to a scale that is large enough to go beyond pilots. To say, can we make it 500 million? Can we make it 1 billion? So we can really talk to large cities and talk to solutions at scale. That I think is the #1 challenge, to take the pilots to scale.
And that's true. That's completely true. And in terms of the examples that you are just mentioned before, I mean the mobility, as you said, Jose Luis, it's a reality in Latin America, and I mean there is something that is coming to the region. And it's a reality, and it's happening right now. So, and it's happening in an informal way, in a really informal and non-secure way. So I think that's a really important point. And in terms of the waste to energy, we have been trying to see more projects in terms of the waste of energy. But what happened in Latin America, there is no regulation for the use of that energy. So you have to waste. You know the technology to go to energy, and there is no regulation to use that energy. So, yes, and that's the reason you are still in the pilots, because you cannot go to the more additional or a real big change in terms of the use of the energy, because you need clear rules, a clear regulation to put that energy in the system, and the system sometimes is it's limited for only what we know right now for the energy market. So the energy market needs to put in place another options, another windows for those kind of energy. And I completely agree with you.
If you, just a brief response. If you want to put it back into the grid, yes, then we need energy reform, which we need for many other reasons. That's partly why we work sometimes with industrial users, so you can have a closed loop system. That 500 tons a day project in Cambodia I mentioned, the energy basically goes as refuse-derived fuel to a cement company, so they don't need the government to change the policy. You find an industrial user to take the whole energy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your little inputs. I think what we started to say, that to tackle climate change and to do a climate action, really, a circular economy should be part of the solution. And I think it's starting to everybody is starting to be aware of. So, well, I hope from CAF we will work on it, not in pilot projects, but in the region and in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much, everybody, and good afternoon.